We're talking with Robert W. Nishman, who is an attorney still practicing in Brooklyn, is that right?
Well, I practice in Long Island.
Practicing in Long Island.
Generally, the five boroughs.
But we're here aboard the Battleship New Jersey talking with former Lieutenant J.G. Nishman,
That's correct.
who served aboard the New Jersey from 1954 to 1956. Thanks for talking with us.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Tell me, first of all, how you ended up on the New Jersey.
Well, I was a college student in started in 1950 at Columbia, and the Korean War was on. During that period of time, it became evident that all the young fellows are going to be serving at one point or another. Although I had a student deferment, and I had no problem from that standpoint, but my father was ill. He was had several heart attacks, and my mother was quite worried about the fact that would push him over the top if I ended up getting drafted. And so I joined the NROTC at college, and when I finished my 4 years, I was then in a position to be called for active duty. We were told at the time that we might have a year delay, and again, my mother suggested to me that I couldn't sit around the house and do nothing for a year, so I applied to law school. I got accepted at law school, and then I got called into the Navy.
Oh well.
Oh well.
Best laid plans.
But it was okay. I was assigned to the New Jersey directly. I don't think that I ever had any choice or any indication of the type of ship that I would like to serve on, although I had served on a destroyer as a midshipman, and I was not nuts about that. I picked up the New Jersey after it got back from Korea. I had sailed on the Iowa, which was a similar class battleship to the New Jersey, until New Jersey got to Norfolk, Virginia, and then I went on board there and stayed there the entire 2 years that I was in the service.
Interesting. Now, so tell me just a quick capsulization of your tours of duty. Where did the New Jersey take you while you were there?
Well, we did 2 tours in the Mediterranean. So I had a wonderful opportunity to travel, something that I had not done up to that point. We were in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, in fact, we were in one of the Iron Curtain countries, and I don't recall which one it was because we played basketball there, and I was coaching the team. And Norfolk, Virginia, where we spent refitting. The Mediterranean was the prime source of duty that the ship had while I was in the service.
Right. Now, when you came aboard, you roomed with a Lieutenant J.G. Lewis Ivey, who since went on, who actually stayed in the Navy. You got out, he stayed and became a captain before retiring, who had the distinction of being the first African-American officer aboard the New Jersey. Now, when you were rooming with him, were you aware of that distinction?
Well, I was certainly aware of the fact that he was black.
He was African-American. There you go.
An African-American. I certainly was aware of the fact that we were, I guess, different. At the same time that Lou was the first African-American, I was a Jew, and there weren't many Jewish officers in the Navy, and certainly not on the New Jersey. But we found each other. We spent some time at the ensign locker together, which is Boys Town. All of the young officers that came on the ship went into the ensign locker, and then ultimately, when you found a roommate that you were able to get along with, you moved out, which is what happened with us. Lou and I found each other. We found ourselves very compatible with one another, and we roomed together and had a wonderful time.
Do you think the fact that you were both minorities in an unusual application is part of what may have drawn you together?
Well, I think perhaps part of it was, sure. Yeah. There's no doubt about the fact that when you're in a position where you know that you're being perceived as different, and you know full well that both of you are perceived as different to some extent, that if you mesh, it's a very, very good thing.
Yes.
He's a highly intelligent, funny guy, good sense of humor, good to be with, a dependable, a good, loyal friend, and we got along great.
Things that you had in common.
We had a lot of things in common. I think there was no doubt about the fact, Lou's background was unusual, and both of his parents were educated. He was really a cut above probably most of the people on the ship. I mean, whether they were black or white.
Right.
And very well educated, very bright. So we had a lot of things in common, and we went out together. We took shore leave together. We commiserated with one another, and the relationship has lasted. It's now since 1954, so it's almost 50 years.
Wow.
So yes, it was a good. It was definitely. It had something to do with that also.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Before we started recording this interview, you were talking to me, and I found very compelling your description of the Iowa class battleships and how important they were as not just a battle tool, but just as a, the Teddy Roosevelt extension of the walk softly and carry a big floating stick.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the amazing size and strength and speed that the Iowa class battleship bespoke is incredible. Over the years, this country has been very, very wise in using it as you said, as Teddy Roosevelt's big stick. If you wanted to get somebody's attention, you pulled out an Iowa class battleship and sent it someplace, and you surely got their attention. We had an experience while I was on the ship when we sailed into the Israeli area, because there was some difficulty going on there, and they just wanted to have the presence of the ship there. And it's amazing what effect it has. If you look at that ship from shore, you swallow hard. There's a sense of power and determination. It's a presence that I don't think any other ship in the Navy has.
Right. And how did you feel on the ship? You talked about its power and its speed, in particular the speed. I mean, did you have a feeling of speed aboard the ship?
Well, I think that moving on to New Jersey was like driving a Mercedes. There was you didn't have to feel it to know it. I mean, you put on the gas and the car would go, and the same thing is true with that ship. It had the power, and if you needed it, it produced. So, but you weren't flung around. I mean, there wasn't any sense of getting tossed around if the ship moved at a rapid rate. No.
Right. What were your divisions? What were your assignments on the ship?
I was, interestingly, as I mentioned to you, when I came aboard the ship, my first duty station was up in Spot 1, which is, again, at the top of the ship, and what we would do would be to go up there during gunnery exercises, etc., or if it became necessary in wartime, and you would let the gun batteries know whether they were short or long in firing a shell, and there was a means of bracketing when you would go back and forth until you hit your target. You remember that the Jersey's batteries had a 23 to 24 mile range, which is pretty incredible to be, and to be accurate at that range. I then ended up as a gunnery in one of the turrets. I believe it was 3 that I was a gunnery officer in. Those were the only departments that I was involved in at all.
Well, you certainly got assigned to the big guns.
Oh, definitely, absolutely, and it was a real experience.
Yeah. In that spotting process, I mean, we hear, the tails are, 23 miles, accurate within 100 meters in the second round, and I mean, is that pretty close to correct?
That's very correct. They were amazing. You didn't have to, if you were short, perhaps the second shell might be long, but the third one was right on target, and very often the second one was right on target, because the adjustment was made quickly and the accuracy was unbelievable.
Yeah. And in the turrets, I mean, the book says that each gun is, 2 rounds a minute. Were you really doing about 2 rounds a minute, or was that pretty close to that?
Oh, I think it was capable of doing that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, mostly gunnery exercises, and up on the top, that must have been a particularly impressive bird's eye view.
Well, it was a bird's eye view. It also, the thing I remember most about it was the stack gas, because we were up and the stacks would blow and it would come in. But it was definitely a bird's eye view. It was something that you experienced, and it was fascinating.
Yeah. Life aboard ship. Now, you're an officer, so obviously it's a little bit better than theoretically an enlisted man's life. But what kind of things do you remember about that? What stands out in your brain? It's interesting, the stack gas being an interesting observation as something you don't think about. You think about being up top there and, I don't know, maybe you get a little more motion, but you don't think about those kind of things. But what kinds of things about life aboard ship do you remember?
Well, truthfully, not a great deal, which means to me that there wasn't a great deal of turmoil. By that I mean that the type of pressure that we received was not political. It was really doing your job. If you did your job and you worked at it, you did it well, things moved pretty smoothly. I had recollections of incidents that I would prefer to forget, only because they were motivated by the fact that I was Jewish, but they were not constant. I think that what you did is you learned how to handle yourself, as we did, and everybody does. You learn to handle yourself. You don't relish it, but then again, I think you understand the fact that people are different, and you would love to make an impact on them. You'd love to be able to get them to see you as just one of the guys. It's a little difficult because they don't perceive you as being one of the guys. A good deal of the people that we dealt with, or that I was dealing with, was Southern, and whereas Dr. Ivy had problems in one area, I had problems also in that area, because the concept was that Jews had horns and tails, and it was, I mean, they would tell you, well, we see that you don't. And you say, well, believe me, none of us do.
Right.
Take my word for it. This is not something that you're going to find. But I can't honestly say that I was held back as a result of it. I think that everybody did know, however, that I was an NROTC student, that I didn't plan to make
regular
the Navy a career. Right. And I think that the one opportunity that I had that I would have liked to have had that was denied to me was the fact that I wanted to go to JAG. There had been an opportunity.
Since you were studying law.
Right. They would send certain officers to get legal training, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't send me. And honestly, I'm not a super qualified gunnery officer. I think you could spare me, which is something that I really wanted to do, but they wouldn't. But other than that, it moved along okay. I mean, we managed.
Yeah. Is that learning to cope with different people in different circumstances? Would you say that's what you took away, or should I rephrase that as, what else of importance did you take away, do you think, from your naval career, and being as it was almost entirely aboard the New Jersey?
Well, I think that I matured. I went into the Navy when I was 20. I was a young 20. I had gotten through school pretty quickly. I got through college pretty quickly, and what it did was that it gave me a sense of myself as a person, as a leader, the sense of responsibility, being able to carry out a job, whether you in fact liked it or not, but did your job to the best of your ability. Relate to people, which I think it's always stood me in good stead, because I'm practicing law over 40 years. You got to get along with people. At this particular moment, my wife, I'm sure, is laughing, because she's going to say, "You've got to be kidding." But I did learn a lot, and I think that it was a worthwhile experience, and I think and I've said it forever that for me it was a worthwhile 2 years that I spent, and I don't think I ever would have matured as quickly or had progressed as well if I had not had the time in the service.
Right. Well, we're very grateful you took time to talk with us. He is Robert Nishman. He is a practicing attorney, 40 years now in Long Island, and 2 years aboard the New Jersey from 54 to 56. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
People. I tell you what I was most angry about, because how stuff travels to the military. I was most angry about hearing that the Marines did not even have ammo in their weapons, because back then everything had to be so PC, you couldn't do that, and those guys never had to die. But because of the decisions people make, to me it helped create that. Now maybe they would have come up with another way, maybe they couldn't have gone so far, but you know what, it hurt, and it still to this day bugs me. It really irritated us. And so the day that we finally got to cut loose with the 16s, we were happy. And we fired rounds all day long. And to us, it was getting even. It was getting even. You hurt us. You hurt us. And that's kind of, to me, how I looked at it. We're getting even.
Did that affect the morale of the crew, the bombing of the Marine barracks, and how did the crew feel? Was it similar to your reactions?
I think different people were different ways. I remember there were nights we were up here that I remember laying in my rack, and I would hear people crying. They were young kids. They had wives and stuff. They never expected to be away for a long time. But no, it kind of galvanized us. We all felt the same way. But we were all here and all together, and most of us were kids, and I don't want to say it was a game, because it wasn't. But we didn't look at the world the same way. Not like we would now. We just didn't. We were invincible. When you're in your 20s, your teens, nothing's going to hurt you. But then all these guys were gone. And that really bugged us. It really bugged us. And I can't say how everybody felt. I think that after it happened, it's just one of those things we didn't talk about. That day that it happened, we talked about it. Scuttlebutt said, well, they're looking for volunteers to come in and be able to help dig out. And then nothing ever happened on that, because some of us were wanting to do that. But no, I don't remember what it did. I just know how I personally felt, and kind of some of the other guys. I mean, they're the guys that were gone. We didn't know that now the Master Chief that was from the ship, that because that was us, even more so that hurt us.
The ship, by the way, for your information, did hold a memorial for Chief Gorczynski, which I have on tape. If you ever like to get a copy of that, I can make a little DVD copy up for you too and mail it out to you. So you and your friends can take a look at it. That was done on the ship about 2 years ago, I think. They had a memorial ceremony and so on like that to honor the chief.
They did. That would be nice. We did a burial at sea for him too, right after we came back. But no, it was an experience. One of the things that really irritated people, most people don't know about, is when we came here, we were originally told we were going to be home by Christmas. Chief of Naval Operations, I think it was the Chief of Naval Operations, sat right up in the mess deck and said, you guys will be home by Christmas. Well, we didn't make it. We didn't make it at all. It was a long time before we got to come home.
As a final question, because we have 3 minutes to go, did anybody, you said the Marines supposedly didn't have ammunition in their weapons at the gate and so on like that, but was anybody on the ship angry at the President? Because later he's criticized Ronald Reagan for putting the Marines in a hotel, which became their barracks, which was exposed instead of having them dig in as a combat unit
No,
would.
you know what? That didn't happen because if you think about kind of how what happened with the ship was because Reagan was the guy that came here, the president that came and commissioned the ship. It was very, very popular. I don't ever remember hearing anybody saying anything against the president, because you know what? Yeah, it did make a difference where they put him, but the world at the time was a different place. It was supposed to have been a safer place, and I never heard anybody. We were mad at the people that did it, and there's a fine distinction there. We weren't mad at the Lebanese people. You know, we weren't mad at the people there in Beirut. We were mad at the people that did it. And at the times, you had all these different factions, and I don't even remember the names. I remember going to CEC or CIC, and you had all these different names of these different groups. And you know, back then, like now you talk the Shiites and Hezbollah and all this other stuff. Back then, they were just names you seen on the wall. You didn't have all the press that you have now with it. But stuff like that was out there a long time ago. Most people don't realize that. It's not brand new stuff.
As a matter of fact, the captain of the ship, what was his name during Beirut? Was Captain?
I don't know. We had Milligan.
Milligan.
And we had, oh my God, I can't even remember all. There were 3 on when I was here. One wasn't here very long.
But one of the captains in an interview, which I later read, done by the historian Paul Stillwell, naval historian, he said the captain said about the battleship New Jersey in Beirut, he said, here we are using a battleship to try, it's like trying to swat fleas on a cow or something like that. We're after maybe 10 or 20 people firing 16-inch guns at them up in the mountains, and are we really getting to them? But he said it was the first sign of terrorism that we were running into now, and that people in the United States, as you say, were not even vaguely aware of what's happening in the Middle East as far as terrorism goes. Yeah, it's very interesting, that little piece of the interview, and you sort of support what he's saying too.
Yeah, no, we all felt the same way. We didn't realize, and here's a little quick snippet that most people probably don't know, and this was, and I don't know the gentleman's name. There was a Marine that was there when that went down that survived that. He was also a firefighter that died when the buildings fell in New York. Most people don't know that. It was there are certain websites that some of us veterans belong to, and one of the guys put it on there that this guy that was with him was one of the guys that passed.
Randy, I'm sorry, we do have to cut it short. It is 3 o'clock, and I did promise it to stop. I don't want you to miss your. Thank you very much. Today, I've been interviewing Mr. Randy Murphy, who served aboard the battleship New Jersey from 1983 to 86, and was, of course, involved in the Beirut situation. My name is Dr. Tom Bannett. I'm from Kean University, and today's date, of course, is March 9th, 2010, April 9th, 2010. I'll get that straight. Thank you, Randy, very much.
Thank you.
Let's then go into the Pacific. Now the ship is going into the Pacific in January, February of 42. By the way, do you recall when you first heard about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, do you recall your attitude and other people's reactions to that?
Yes, I think that to say that we were concerned, I think the fact that we wanted to get out there and do our share, make this thing, make them pay for what they have done, and that was the theme that we took out the Pacific with us, and that's the whole crew I'm talking about. It wasn't just a bunch of Marines or sailors or guys on the ship. Everybody, even the guys who worked in the engine rooms and so forth. Went into Pearl Harbor, and that was a sad sight. And of course, we were the only battleship really at that time in the Pacific.
What did you see? Paint us a word picture of what you saw at Pearl Harbor when you pulled in.
Well, naturally you saw the sunken ships, and the lack of ships was sort of a disappointing thing. Of course, they had some destroyers in there, a couple of cruisers, as I recall, but what you see in the movies, it wasn't that sight. It was just an empty shell, sort of, not the large naval base that you expected.
So all the ships were out at sea, I guess
Well, they were in repairs. They were gone to Bremerton for repairs. There were 3 or 4 battleships that were able to maneuver and get out, go back for repairs. Then we actually did nothing more than go in there and for supplies in Pearl Harbor. Went out and then cruised around the Fijis a little bit. Had a landing, Marine Corps landing. The 1st Division landed there as a mock landing. And then Guadalcanal. We were off the shore of Guadalcanal. Again, the only battleship out there. And that kind of disappointed me in a way because they kept us off to away from the real battle line, the bombardment of Guadalcanal. And
why did they keep you? Why do you think they kept you away from the actual battle area?
You know, I don't really know the reason why. I just surmised that it would. It's the only battleship there, and it was brand new. And of course, the Japanese were hunting us down. They claimed at that time they'd sunk us 3 times. This is the news they broadcast with little Rosie O'Donnell, not Rosie O'Donnell, but Tokyo Rose. Make sure you bleep that out. She's in enough problems. Anyway, I think that could have been the reasons. We then were in Noumea, went down to Noumea, New Caledonia, and anchored out there. And at that time, they were forming a fleet. We had the Wasp there, the Hornet there, the Saratoga. Those were the 3 of the carriers that I remember. So we were there. They gave the crew liberty, half the crew liberty, and all of a sudden, they said, blew the horn, they pulled up anchor, got as many of the crew back on the ship again. That's when we took off, and supposedly with the carriers to find this Japanese fleet that was hovering somewhere off the Solomons. And what happened then was I was in a 5-inch mount. My secondary battle station was in a 5-inch mount as a trainer, and I was looking through the periscope, and I told the gun captain, I said, another plane just landed on the Wasp and crashed. You'd see that, and the smoke would come up. And then I looked down again, I said, holy mackerel. That's when evidently the 3 or 4 torpedoes hit the Wasp. And next thing you know, somebody outside hollered torpedo, and boom, that hit us. And it was, we then, the list on it, I said 15 degrees. They told me, history says no, it's 5 degree list that and they turned in. And what happened was, there was a Lieutenant J.G., who was the damage control officer, he should have gotten some kind of a medal for it, but he righted the ship by flooding the other side. And as we turned, he balanced that off. And then we took off for about 10 days. We were at sea. We had 2 destroyers that came out. What happened was the destroyers, I don't know how many submarines were there. History says, the one part of the history, it'll say 1, the other one says fleet, squadron of submarines.
Now, by the way, when you're hit by the torpedo, was it an airdrop torpedo?
Oh, no, a submarine.
Submarine torpedo, gotcha.
Yeah.
And where did it hit on the ship?
Just forward of the number 1 turret, and there was no armor belt there.
Port or starboard side?
Port side.
Port side.
Yeah.
And there's no armor belt?
No armor belt there. So it made it was 30 feet long by 18 feet high. That's the hole it made in it. It was their number one torpedo, the most powerful torpedo they had, 900 tons of powder. That's what the explosive power of the torpedo was. It was their number one.
Now, what, besides damage to the ship, what about casualties?
Well, we lost 9 men. One was washed over the side after we hit, turning, and we buried 2 at sea, and the rest were some were taken when we went to Tonga. They pulled them out of the compartments, and they closed the hatches and flooded out, and a couple of guys were trapped there. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. What was the reaction of the crew to this torpedoing? What went on after that?
Well, there was a lot of excitement. Some of it was, you might say, I hate to use comical, but the 2 guys came up from the below decks, and they had evidently been shaving, and they looked like they were foaming from the mouth. Everybody was running and screaming, getting to their battle stations. And that's pretty much, we held there for several days till we got into Tonga. And we had 2 destroyers with us. Other than that, the damage was severe. And pulling into in the Christmas Islands, an island called Tonga, which is a naval base there, a storage base, and they had some repair, and the divers went down. I think they picked up a couple more bodies, and made some preliminary corrections on the cutting out a lot of the compartments to prepare it for to reconstruct it. While we were there, I think one day we were looking over the side, Ring and I was looking over the side, and a motor launch comes up with about 40, 45 nurses and waves. And I said, my God, what is this? I looked down at the motor launch when it pulled alongside, and I saw a gal down there that I used to date in Portland, Maine, when we were in Casco Bay. His sister, the guy that was next to me, his sister was down there. She was a nurse. They were both nurses. Anyway, that was a very interesting period.
And why did the nurses come to the ship? What was going on?
Good question. I never really talked about this to a point because what it was, they were going to have a dance for the officers, and the officers had music and the bar and everything else there. And next thing we know, we were called to arm ourselves because the crew every crew member was up on that forecastle, and they decided to take the gals off. And they came off, and then the guys went back to their duties, whatever they were doing. And of course, we were armed at the time, and it was it was a little stupid on the part of the whoever decided to do it, and you have to blame the captain because he's the final answer to anything like that. And it really was stupid. We'd been away for months, and have these gals. I did meet this nurse that I was dating back in the hospital in Pearl Harbor again. But we never did recount the story or what it was all about, etc. Got into Pearl Harbor then about 10 days later, and they had already erected the compartments and the almost just like you take a puzzle and put it together. It was on the dock. When we pulled in the dry dock, there's this big, long, black thing sitting there. We didn't know what it was. But they took cranes and they set it right in place and welded the thing right alongside. It was already
In
constructed.
other words, they just slid it into the ship
Right.
and just had cut everything out of the
They-
compartments and just rebuilt it.
A lot of it was cut out in Tonga with these divers down there, but they finished cutting it out, and then this whole section just fit. I'm sure there's more plates and welding that they had to do, but that was amazing. And in the meantime, we were, I guess, maybe 2, possibly 3 weeks. I had gone into for some reason I had a sore throat. I went into the sick bay there, which is a hut. They had, and they said, "Open your mouth." The guy I opened my mouth. I don't know who he was. I know he had a different outfit on, whether he was a doctor or probably a corpsman. And they said, "Oh, you got a bad tonsil there." He swabbed it down, and the next guy comes in, takes a pair of pliers, looked like a pair of pliers with a wire on it, and he goes, "Open your mouth wider." Goes click, click, cuts it out, and shows it. Yeah, see that? That's a bad one. That was a bad one. Throws it off to the side, and I'm dying. I said, "God Almighty, I'm going to die. I'm going to die."
Was it painful? Must have been painful.
You know something? I was more in shock than I was in pain. Whatever he swabbed it with, whatever it was. So then he said, "Wait just a minute. Let's take the other one out too." And I don't know what the heck he did. They boom, pulled it out with those wire clippers. And so I'm sitting there dying. Did some kind of swabbed it again. He says, "Okay, you can go back to duty." So I'm going back to the States. He says, "No, you're not either. You're going back to the ship." So I went back to the ship and I didn't eat anything for about 3 weeks after that. They started to cut back on the Marine detachment. We were again in New Caledonia, and about a dozen of the Marines. We're about 100 and some odd Marines. I don't think they. Well, some of them. One guy volunteered. We had a bugler. Oh, by the way, this is interesting. We had Artie Shaw, who was a band leader, very famous band leader in the 40s, 50s. Claude Thornhill was a pianist and also a great composer, aboard ship with us. This is when we were in San Francisco. They were on that ship all this time. And then we had a bugler, a Marine bugler, Paul Link. Paul Link was a musician with Jan Sabat. Jan Sabat was another of that era, that 40s and 50s era, or that 30s, 40s, and 50s. But he would play taps, and everybody would stand still. He was just great. Anytime we were in port, and they could hear it, say the British ship would be in port or in Brooklyn Navy Yard. We're in Brooklyn Navy Yard, and he would play taps. The British captain wanted him to come over and play taps at his place. He was just a super guy, talented, could play any instrument. He wanted to get off the ship. So they let him off the ship, and we learned about 2 months later he was killed on Guadalcanal. But anyway, when they started cutting back, and then we went back to Pearl Harbor, I got off at Pearl Harbor at that time, and went to a placement area called IEA, and that was a very interesting.
So you got off to North Carolina.
Got off North Carolina.
What year was that about? Year and month, as you can recall.
The latter part of 43. Yeah, 43.
And what made you want to get off the ship in 43?
I don't think we had any. They told us we were getting off.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They took another dozen off or so off the ship. And from there, we went to this placement, and then they assigned us to Pearl Harbor. And in Pearl Harbor, that was a very interesting period. I was a sergeant then, And that was a very interesting experience. I think that it was either going back to the States, because I'd had enough time in the war zone to warrant the liberty. I think they gave you 30 days liberty. And then you'd go back again and probably be assigned to one of the FMF divisions. But anyway, I got into Pearl Harbor and acted as Sergeant of the Guard, which is an experience in itself. The prison there was horrible. They say it was the worst prison in the whole Navy complex in the Pacific.
Why was it so bad?
The Marines were guarding it, and they had all kinds of people, deserters there, murderers, even people with AOL. And it was just the officer in charge, he happened to be a Marine, was tough, and so was his sergeants and everything. And they would wet down the sergeant of the guard. Our office was in the prison, right outside the prison area, and they'd take water hoses and wash the guys down. They'd take a runner in the work period. They'd put 2 prisoners and a runner with a shotgun, and they'd work them the road and bring them back. And I guess the dread got around the whole, from what I understand, the whole Pacific area. Don't do anything wrong because you're going to wind up in Pearl Harbor prison. But anyway, it came that way. And then we had some serious things happen to us. One was there were 5 Marines and 5 nurses from the hospital, IEA hospital. They were in a quarry on some kind of a picnic. There were several guys that were from the ammunition, the Chicago explosion and ammunition. They took that group, they were working there, and brought them into Pearl Harbor. They were accused of raping and killing the 5 Marines. So they had a little bit of a skirmish there. We were armed and put out to see if we could control the situation.
Explain that a little bit more. The 5 people, was that Chicago explosion during the war, loading ammunition?
That group that was there, working there.
I see. And they then came to the Pacific, to
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
and they killed the Marines or the nurses?
Both. No, they raped the nurses and killed the Marines. And so naturally the scuttlebutt got around, and the admiral told the Marine colonel not to do anything, but just stand. We armed ourselves with machine guns and everything and set it around this encampment that they were in.
Now, were these white troops or black troops?
Black.
Black. That's because I remember the black soldiers, a number were killed at the Chicago explosion.
Yeah, right.
So that then brings in, of course, the race issue at the time, too. Was there a lot of anti-black feelings as a result of this?
I don't think it was a color situation. The fact that the 5 Marines were killed and the nurses were raped was a rage as far as we were concerned. But anyway, when the order came out that not to move, not to go in, we set back, I guess, about 4 or 5 days around the clock. We were at bivouac, and one morning we woke up and they were all gone.
That was the black troops who were there.
Yeah.
And they were camped. Were they near the Marine near Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, right next to it.
Right next to it.
Right next to it, Pearl, and sort of a compound there. Next morning they were gone. We heard again through the scuttlebutt that they were dropped off in San Francisco and released.
So
that was a little bitter.
In other words, the men who committed the murders and rapes, they were never arrested. And why do you think that happened?
I think that personally, I think the admiral, because of a race issue, decided that one thing we didn't want to do is have a few loose Marines with a gun, and after that happened, and that's why the orders came out that not to. Wasn't a question of raiding it; it's a question of going in there.
So did the authorities know who had committed this crime? They didn't. They weren't sure. So no investigation was carried out. It was just
They sent a naval officer in there to talk to him. The account that we got, he never came out, and I think that's when they decided. They told him that I don't know what they told him, but possibly the things that would go on in these kind of conditions. We're going to come in there with guns. You either get out of here, get on board ship, go back, or we're coming there with guns. And but as I said, after 4 or 5 days, the next morning we woke up and nobody was there. They were all
Now,
on
you
the ship.
said a naval officer went into the camp, and he never came out?
The scuttlebutt. What had happened, he was going in there to negotiate. And
So in this camp, I guess at that time, were there white officers in charge of the unit, or is it normally was, but in World War II, white officers in charge of black units still?
I don't know who. I don't know that there were any white officers in that compound. I don't know.
And roughly how many men were in that compound?
There were 200 or 300.
No, that big. Was that big?
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, that was one experience. The other experience I had along those lines were with the Japanese prisoners. The Navy, with their intelligence, had two Quonset huts full of Japanese prisoners. And our job as sergeant of the guard was to go in those Quonset huts and make sure that nobody's planning anything or they're being taken care of or whatever it was. So we'd have to, the sentries outside, we'd just leave our sidearms there and then go in there. And that was a little scary. What was going to prevent them from jumping us? I would go in there with one of the sentries who was unarmed also, just with a billy club. And that was interesting. And and what they were interrogated by Navy intelligence officers.
What was your feeling towards Japanese, and the general feeling towards Japanese among the men you served with?
I guess the term is, I can't use this term, I don't recall. I would kill any of them I saw, and that would that's pretty much it. From my personal view is they were cunning and also treacherous. So I had no qualms about shooting.
Where'd you get the idea they were treacherous and cunning?
I guess most of it was training that we had in scuttlebutt in the foxholes and things like that, how they'd come up there. And then also, they were the ones of the prisoners that we had in Pearl Harbor, they were very suspicious looking, and they looked at you very suspiciously. Like if they had a chance, they'd kill you.
And I guess, was this a general feeling among the other Marines you served
I
with?
think so, yeah. I think so. I think we had a job to do, and I did run across a couple of guys that were a little out of hand as far as wanting to fight, and they wound up in the brig.
Some Marines who wanted to beat the Japanese up or so like that, yeah. And they would then be arrested and...
No. They didn't. They didn't want to fight.
Oh, they didn't want to fight some
Yeah.
Marines, yeah.
We ran across one, and all the Marines that and there are thousands of them, there was only one that I really saw, which is one too many.
Now, in the last few minutes of the tape, Jim, is there anything else you want to say about your experiences while you're in the Marine Corps? We have about 5, 6 minutes left to go on the tape.
Yes, I do. I will say this. It's a personal thing. Um, I think the best thing that ever happened to me was being in the Marines. I mentioned it earlier. It carried me through pretty much my discipline in business, the pride of being whatever position I had. I was very proud of being with the companies, and and loyalty, I think, was another thing that the Marines taught me that I carried through my life. And it's been a godsend ever since. It's helped me in my career. I had a lot of managerial jobs, did a lot of things, and had a lot of experience. But I contribute that to my family and to the Marine Corps.
Do you find it's interesting in civilian life that other people don't quite understand what you're talking about and your experiences and how those have shaped your life?
Yes, I was mostly in marketing and sales, and so they said, well, it's just sales baloney, and they didn't really understand that. I call them non-combatants. Anybody that wasn't in marketing or sales were non-combatants, and that is pretty much what I got out of it. I've always, that's why I'm here today. I volunteer a lot, and I'll give back as much as I can.
Anything else you want to say that I might not have asked about that you think is important to leave for the future, for historians to hear?
Yes, I think that just talking to Vietnam veterans, the way the public reacted against the veterans was a little bit of a shocker to me in a way. And I think that the public has repented since Iraq. They have a little different view of the military to some extent, not the politicians, just the public themselves about the heroics that are happening there. I was once asked here on the ship, I think Channel 6 was interviewing us, what do you recall most about the World War II? And I said, well, the only thing I can say is that I'm sorry to see that no one who has given me the freedom that I have now is here to enjoy it. And those are the people who perished for our freedom. And that's pretty much the way I feel about the military. I think that some of the things that have happened, even in World War II, as a matter of fact, we pulled into San Francisco, and the first thing we saw on a restaurant sign, in a window rather than a sign, said, "No dogs and servicemen allowed."
And that was when?
And that was in 1941 in San Francisco. That was shocking. Naturally, nobody would go in there. And I had very few encounters like that. We didn't have that. It was a different time, I guess, and the Vietnam thing is a bad taste in my mouth for the way the public acted towards the military establishment, and I think it was brought about by many radical people, some politicians. I hope that that this era that we're going through right now, that doesn't harm the great history that we have in fighting for freedom. There hasn't been one battle that we've been in since our history that it wasn't for the purpose of freedom. And we have our freedom has been all these years has been created by people who go out and fight for it and protect it. And that understanding has to be prevailed, not now, but for centuries to come.
Well, thank you. I've been talking today with Mr. Jim Ramentol. My name is Dr. Tom Bannon from Kean University. Jim served aboard USS North Carolina as part of the Marine Guard Detachment, and then served at Pearl Harbor. Had many, many interesting experiences to tell us about. Jim, I want to thank you very much for the conversation today. It's important to hold this for future historians to look at. I also want to thank you for your service to your country, which is also very, very important to do. Thank you, Jim, very much.
Thank you.